You're listening to Artful Divorce, a podcast dedicated to helping you make sense of the divorce process. I'm John Kinney, a family law attorney, and I'm here to help you find clarity with practical advice and compassionate insights. Hi, this is John Kinney, and this is Artful Divorce. Today, I'm going to talk about a top 10 list of areas and subjects that clients and litigants should really focus on while they go through the beginning of the divorce process. And creating a top 10 list is sort of helpful to organize thoughts. And so for many years, I've given my clients a top 10 list of things to think about at the beginning of a divorce. And I thought it might be helpful to go through some of those things in a podcast so that people can be better prepared and hopefully be knowledgeable about the things that they're going through that they might not realize that they're going through. Number one issue is getting your mind right. And what I mean by that when I talk to my clients is people are so overwhelmed, and sometimes they make mistakes leading up to the divorce or during the divorce, such as posting on social media harmful evidence, things that are going to come back to hurt them, engaging in drinking or drug behaviors that end up causing problems in their divorce, staying out late at night, partying, engaging in behaviors that are not super helpful, drunk texting their spouse with threatening or angry texts or texts that reveal bad information. Those are all things that happen in divorces, and frankly, they cause a lot of problems for people. And so everything you write, everything you post on social media is subject to being produced for a judge, and it's just a forgotten thing. Many people have impulse control issues while they go through a divorce, and so your worst instincts can come back to haunt you. And so getting your mind right, very important at the beginning of a divorce. And how do you get your mind right? Well, you rely on your team and your friends and your family for support, and you have conversations about what you're about to go through and what you need. And you can find a therapist to help you if that's something that is available to you. But sometimes just spending time with a friend or a family member in conversation about your mental health and where you're at is the most important thing that you can do. And so it's very important to go into a divorce with your focus on the right things. And getting your mind right just means being your best self while you matriculate through one of the worst things in life that's ever going to happen to you. And sometimes it's difficult. So you need to refocus, because if you lose focus and you don't give your lawyer good information and you sort of check out, it's remarkable how a bad result can come about very quickly. And so when you're going through this awful process, you really need to make sure that you're positive, you don't think negatively, that you talk to friends and family about what you're going through, and don't circle the wagons and isolate. And all of those things are very important at the beginning of a case. The next, number 2 on the top 10 list, is thinking about the right things. And what I mean by that is there's certain confusing issues that oftentimes are part of the fuzzy thought process as you go through a divorce. And I find that many clients focus on things that are meaningless in the long term. I have clients who get into a granular level of detail about a conversation they might have had with a spouse, and it's very important for them to get the details of that conversation communicated to me. And I oftentimes interrupt them and say, right now we're going to take a 30,000 foot view of everything, and let's back up and let's refocus on what's really important to talk about right now. And so there are things, for example, your 401k is going to be there in 6 months. It's going to be there in 12 months. That's not something that you need to talk about with your lawyer at the beginning of a divorce. There's more important issues. And so thinking logically and not emotionally is a discussion that I have with clients quite a bit. And I think I talk a lot about what my clients are going to be acting and thinking like 2 years later. And I oftentimes talk to clients about protecting them from making poor decisions based on emotion, because in 2 years they're going to care about some of the things that maybe they're willing to give away while they're going through a divorce. And what I mean by that is, when you're exhausted with the divorce process and all you want is closure and healing, sometimes you want to give away a position or an asset or an issue in your divorce because you just want it over with. And I talk to people a lot about how later on they might regret that decision, but while they're in the crucible of a divorce and the heat's on, they just may feel like giving up. And I often talk to people about how my job is to protect them from themselves sometimes. And at the same time, if a client really wants to settle, I usually facilitate that unless I think something is going to be so unfair that I need to withdraw from the case. And so there's a fine line of focusing on the right things, making sure that you're not giving up the farm, and that you're making logical choices and not emotional choices. The third thing on my top 10 list when I talk to folks in my practice is telling them to get ready to work. The more a client works on their own case, the better result they usually get. And if you're relying on your lawyer and your lawyer's paralegal to do the heavy lifting on all of the issues in your divorce, sometimes you're disappointed. In other words, spoon feeding your lawyer the information they need and the evidence that they need to go get you a good result is oftentimes a recipe for getting everything that you want in your divorce. But many times people are so overwrought or lack focus and don't want to do the work. And so it's oftentimes a conversation that I have with people that, and it sounds sort of crass or maybe a little odd to say, but in a divorce, I oftentimes tell people the truth is out there, and there is ultimately going to be an effort to get at the truth in your case. But what I need is evidence. So don't think that you're just going to tell me what the truth is and that it's going to be automatically a part of anything that happens in your divorce. You have to tell me what the evidence is that will get us to the truth. And so telling me that you are the primary care provider is maybe your truth. But what I need from you is evidence that gets me to that truth. So instead of telling me that you are a primary care provider, go to the daycare and get 2 years worth of records showing that you dropped off and you picked up. Go to the pediatrician's office and collect your child's medical chart with all the entries in it where you were the one bringing your child in for the well visits and you were the one handling immunizations, and the nurse's notes all make reference to you. And so these are the kinds of things that I talk about with clients, and that is, do the work. Don't try to tell your lawyer what happened. Prove to your lawyer what happened. And obviously I used daycare records and medical records, and that's only limited to maybe child issues, but that holds true for all of the issues in your divorce. Go find the bank records from the house you bought prior to the marriage. When you sold the house, the money was deposited. Go find the title binder for that house that shows the HUD settlement statement and where the money went and what was put down and what the sales proceeds were and all of the things related to the real estate transaction. Those are key pieces of evidence. And so you can tell us, lawyers, that you had a house prior to the marriage and that house was used as a down payment and you want to carve that out of the marital estate. And that's your truth. But what we really need is the evidence. And so that requires a lot of hard work. And sometimes it's something that the folks just don't want to do because, again, they're exhausted, they're overwhelmed, and sometimes they just don't have the bandwidth to get the work done. If you have minor children, obviously that's number one on your list of priorities as you go through a divorce. And so finding out what your kids need, how they're doing psychologically, focusing them on the right things, connecting with the school counselors and teachers and other people who are a part of their lives to make sure that they seem to be doing okay. That's a real focus for me when I meet with folks. And I really think therapy can be important for children, but oftentimes teenage kids are resistant to therapy. But if your child is struggling and they can talk to a neutral person and talk to that person about the things that they're struggling with that they might not be willing to share with their parents, or they might not feel as comfortable sharing with their parents, therapy can be a wonderful resource for kids to unload some of the stress and anxiety that they carry around with them while their parents are going through a divorce. You really need to check in with your children and get eyeballs on them more than normal. And so I think that's important for anybody going through a divorce, is to focus on their children more so than they otherwise do. We've talked about this with Leanne Mercer, the divorce coach, but it is important to think before you act and take care of yourself and be careful about who you talk to and what you are seen doing and what you do. And so you have to be careful about sharing confidential information with folks that might not have your best interest in mind. And so sort of have to circle the wagons and be very careful about who you share information with as you go through the divorce process. We've talked about 5 different items to really consider and think about as you start the divorce process. And so number 6 is thinking about liquidity. And that sounds like an odd thing to say, but as you get started with a divorce and you contemplate a divorce, many of your assets are secure. Your house is something that you can worry about later. It's not going to get sold as you go through contemplating a divorce. Your investment accounts are oftentimes protected because you oftentimes need 2 signatures to take distributions out of a joint account. But bank accounts sometimes have quite a bit of savings in them, and I think it's important to get advice from an attorney about how to handle liquid assets as you move through the beginnings of the divorce process. Oftentimes a lawyer will advise to take half of any liquid accounts and put them into your own name. And that makes sense logically, because that asset is then divided for all time, and you can't really be criticized for taking half. And you may be worried about your spouse taking all of it and leaving you without a lot of resources. And so that is advice that's given quite often, but you really should depend on your own lawyer in your particular state related to those kinds of things. But it is important to secure assets that are moving around quickly, or can be moved around quickly, rather. There's also cash, oftentimes in safes or shoeboxes. Cash tends to disappear as a divorce is considered and talked about in a household. Jewelry, personal property, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but just think about liquidity and the types of assets that can disappear when you consider a divorce. The seventh item that I talk to folks about is sentimental items. It's amazing how many times you get to the end of a divorce, maybe even a divorce where you've divided millions of dollars of assets, and when personal property comes up, it just bogs the case down. It becomes very difficult to settle. Sentimental personal property can loom large in a divorce and be very difficult to resolve. And so it's important to consider securing sentimental items, particularly if they're gifts to you from family members. I've had cases where sentimental personal property has disappeared or has been destroyed in a spiteful way. And my advice sometimes is to take very, very sentimental items and secure them somewhere outside of the house. And again, you need to rely on your local advice for something like that, but it is important to think about sentimental items. They come up over and over again, and oftentimes they're overlooked at the beginning of a case. And I've had cases where the Christmas ornaments that were created by the children in grade school, that box has disappeared, but my client didn't know about it until the divorce was over. Suddenly they're panicked about the fact that, the sentimental item is gone and it's too late to address it once the case is over. Number 8 is just really focusing on credit and joint credit cards. Many times, joint credit cards can be used to pay for attorney's fees or can be run up as the divorce approaches. And so you're really going to want to talk to your lawyer about debt and credit issues and have good information about that as you approach the beginning of a divorce. Number 9 is essentially finding an attorney. And obviously, the people who come to see me, I want them to pick me as an attorney. So it sounds odd to talk to them about finding an attorney, but really, I tell my initial consultations to think hard about a good fit. And many times people are meeting with more than one lawyer to try to find the right fit and the person that they want to hire. And a personality has to fit your personality. And you may meet with a lawyer who's got a great reputation, but they're not going to be a good fit in terms of the way they communicate or their background and experience or their approach to litigation. And so you have to really think hard about who you're going to choose as an attorney. I actually will sometimes provide a list of attorneys to people that I meet with so that they know that I'm open to the idea that I might not be the right fit, and that here are the 4 or 5 lawyers that I think are good advocates in my community, because everybody needs to feel comfortable and confident in their chosen counsel. And the final thing that I talk to people about in an initial consultation is housing. Where is everybody going to live? If you think that there is going to be an order that requires you to leave the marital residence, it's probably valuable to take a look at what's available, look at the kind of rent you might be paying. Maybe you're going to go live with a family member. You need to make arrangements for where you're going to live if you think you're going to be excluded from the home. And then at the same time, if you're really hopeful about staying in the marital residence, how are you going to pay the bills? How are the bills for the house going to be paid? And that's all something that you should be talking to your attorney about at the beginning of the case. And so that's my top 10 list for things you should think about when you're going through a divorce. And this is Artful Divorce. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Artful Divorce. If today's episode was helpful, you can find more information at www.artfuldivorce.com. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. For personalized legal advice tailored to your situation, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your area.